When it comes to understanding the mental aspects of prejudice, or at least the psychology part of it, there are three main theories behind that. And one is imitation or conditioning, so where people learn their prejudices from families. Two is perceived similarity and dissimilarity. So that goes into the culture conflict, those we see as outsiders. So that's the cognitive reasoning. And lastly is really the personality aspects. So that's the psychoanalytic, and it deals more with some theories that Freud had developed. There are three levels of prejudice as described by Kramer. The cognitive level deals with our own ethnocentrism. And if you remember that word, how we make our own values the center of the universe, then looking down on others and their perspectives obviously can influence our prejudices. When it comes to the authoritarian personality type, that is seen as one of the personality types that has a higher incidence of experiencing prejudicial attitudes. And that really deals with someone just taking out their own rigid frustrations uh, on another person. And that process is really called displaced aggression. When it comes to the emotional level, that deals with the feelings that arise when you see someone else. Do they raise feelings of anxiety, of fear, of anger? That's what the emotional deals with, our reaction to people. The third is action orientation. Now, this one is tricky because this doesn't deal with what you actually do, but what is your predisposition to do? Are you willing to help someone of a different group than you, of different ethnic background, religious? That's what action orientation deals with, just with your disposition to do something. When it comes to the issue of prejudice, one of the bigger things, at least in the history of the United States, is self justification. And that's basically denigrating a person or group to justify our own maltreatment of them. This is basically when we say they deserve the discrimination that they experience, and we rationalize how we treated them. When it came to groups such as the Native Americans, we said things like, "Oh, well, this particular group wasn't using the land right." Or when it came to slaves, there was a lot of Christian self justification where people find reasons to justify slavery in the Bible. With all of the psychological reasonings behind prejudice, which is just strictly the attitudinal aspects, uh, socialization still plays a part. Remember last time we talked about social norms and culture. So, can social norms play a part? Absolutely. Stereotypes, those oversimplified generalizations, what culture and society and our own norms teaches us about a group. Uh, it's interesting if you look at an entire generation or a nation that has some sort of tragic history. Well, it's not that whole bunch of individuals sort of just chose to be prejudiced, but there was attitudes and prevailing beliefs at the time. Nazi Germany is a great example of this because when people were asked, well, why did you participate in these genocides? They were really just saying, well, we were following orders. So it was the social norm to do those sort of hateful acts. But another aspect of experiencing uh, prejudice is media. Now, Media can be a great tool for hindering or even increasing prejudicial attitudes. If you think about the show I Love Lucy, one of the first major historic shows to actually show an interracial couple. And for the Arnezes, for groups that had never encountered a Hispanic culture before, think about how much that did for race relations in the U.S. I know last time we talked about the Power Rangers and color coding, but just to focus on this picture, this Burger King commercial, look at the way women are overly sexualized in just eating food. Now, think about how ridiculous that would be if a man was caught in those same sort of positions. But we accept that sort of socialization about women and their sexuality in order to sell a product. Moving on from prejudice, which is just the attitudinal aspect. Discrimination is the denial of opportunities and equal rights to individuals and groups because of prejudice or arbitrary reasons. Discrimination is the behavior. That's what discrimination is. If you look in your book, they talk about a man by the name of Robert Merton, who had a model of prejudice and discrimination. And he says when it comes to prejudice and discrimination, there were four types of people: the non prejudiced non discriminator, the non prejudiced discriminator, the prejudiced non discriminator, and the prejudice discriminator. And they have this great illustration that goes along with that. But the non prejudice, non discriminator likes everybody and doesn't have any sort of prejudicial or discriminatory behavior. Type 2 is the person who is a discriminator, but they are non prejudicial, meaning um, they'll behave in a discriminatory manner, but will think, hey, I really don't have anything against this particular group or person. A prejudiced non-discriminator is the type of person who does have the negative prejudicial attitudes but refuses to act those out. And the last one is what is called an all-weather bigot or a prejudice discriminator. This is someone who has a prejudicial attitude and also discriminates. And what Robert Merton really showed is that people don't always act out their prejudicial attitude, or just because they have it doesn't mean that they'll act on those instincts. Next, I would like to deal with social and institutional discrimination. Social discrimination is the type of discrimination that happens on the social level, and it deals with social distance, refusing to marry someone based on race, religion, and creed. It's just the way society is set up. Institutional discrimination is the unequal treatment that is in laws. So, not being able to vote, being forbidden by law to marry someone from a different race. That's entrenched in the custom. That's institutional discrimination. A great example is during the Jim Crow era, it was entrenched in the laws to have separate black and white facilities. That was institutional discrimination. However, even after those laws were ended with Brown versus Board of Education, many families would not choose to send their kids to school with African Americans because of social discrimination, not because it was against the law. Total discrimination is all discrimination that has ever existed, and deals with both past and present, from poor schooling to menial job opportunities, which is really key in dealing with current minority experiences. How does all discrimination impact that particular group? The interesting thing about institutional discrimination, as far as laws being entrenched in the system is that it might not necessarily be on purpose or name a specific racial group, but it might impact a minority group inadvertently. One big example of this was actually the drug laws that have been dealt with in recent years. Cocaine was a huge drug in the 80s, and so there was a huge anti drug campaign. But they made separate laws for cocaine and crack, even though pharmaceutically they are both the same drug. Now, cocaine was seen as a drug of the higher, wealthier groups, while crack in the cheaper form was seen as the drug of the poor, minority groups. And so the different sentencing for the same crime represented institutional discrimination. It didn't say flat out that, oh, well, black people are going to get more time for crack, but that's the way the law worked out, even though whites and blacks were both dealing with the same drug. And so in recent years, a lot of people had to either have shortened sentences or be released because the laws that were written in effect were unfair. Even racial profiling can be a form of institutional discrimination. I believe it was Arizona who said that they would do a random search of people to see if they were citizens or not. Well, think about it. If they're going to do a random search, do you think they're going to pull over um, people who are redheads or people who have blue eyes? No, they're going to pull over people they believe are Hispanic descent, and that was the trend. So institutional discrimination can happen in racial profiling as well. And racial profiling is simply any action taken by law enforcement based on someone's background and not necessarily any type of crime that they commit. Remember, discrimination impacts people's opportunities. And for minority groups who have trouble securing work because of discrimination, it is not uncommon for them to turn to the informal economy. And that's basically an economy that they get a job that is not reported to the government. Now, anybody can do this, but particularly for a group that is discriminated against, they might rely on an informal economy to help supplement their income. And you can see this with people who sell oranges on the side of the roads. They may not necessarily report that to the government, but that's just one example. One of the long lasting legacies of discrimination is inequality as far as wealth. Past discrimination carries into the future. Now, your income, which is your salaries and wages, is different from your wealth. Your wealth encompasses everything as far as your stocks, bonds, um, everything that is of value that belongs to you. And for people who have been systematically discriminated against, what you find is that they have far less wealth than their counterparts. Last week, I asked you guys about your American dream. And how that connects with the discrimination is, well, how does society's perceptions, how do laws, how does socioeconomic status impact your ability to achieve your American dream? For minority groups in particular, they can experience what is known as relative deprivation. And relative deprivation is the quality of life that is different or lower than what the standard should be. For example, in your American dream, a lot of you guys said you wanted your own business, you wanted to be educated, you wanted to be successful. Well, what if your quality of life is not reflecting the things that America says you should have, like owning your own home? Then you would be experiencing relative deprivation. By contrast, absolute deprivation is that quality of life that we don't expect anybody to live in. That means no running water, no electricity, and discrimination can lead to that. Now, we don't see a great deal of that here in America, but it definitely can happen. Most of the poverty here in America is relative deprivation, where people don't have access to, let's say, the jobs or the resources that they need in order to achieve their American dream.